Are you all
Hello.
excited for this next conversation? I am. My partner in this dialogue today is Helen Crowley. She usually is the Sustainable Sourcing Innovation Head at Kering. But right now she's on sabbatical, and she's a fellow at Conservation International, and she's also working in advising the Nature Action Agenda for the World Economic Forum. And our topic today is the role that companies can play in biodiversity and conservation, and how this is embedded into your philosophy and your sustainability efforts. But I actually have a little bit of a personal question for Helen first, and that is just, okay, a sabbatical, and okay, you're going to spend your sabbatical at a conservation organization. What inspired that, and what sort of ulterior motives you have for bringing that back to Kering?
Okay, wow, well, that's great. I'm so lucky doing a sabbatical. I can highly recommend, and so I think you should all go back to your companies and say, you know about a sabbatical, let's do a sabbatical program. So the thing about, at Kering, as a French company, you actually you have the right to ask after 5 years whether you want to take a congé sabbatique, a sabbatical. I've been there 8 years. So I thought, why did I get inspired? There's actually 3 reasons. One of them, and I refer back to what Joel said at the very beginning of this conference, and it was about we're sort of surrounded by trauma as sustainability people, and I'm a conservation biologist by training, so I've lived the 30 years that we talk about where we've lost so much, and I was a conservation biologist for much of that, so I feel a sort of personal responsibility at how we haven't succeeded in the way that we needed to. And I sort of take a little bit of time to mourn that. And I thought, but you know what? We've got to figure out new ways of doing things. And I figured that there may be things I didn't know, that I wanted, like new ways of doing things. Everyone says it's time to act, it's totally time to act, but we've got to act in the right way because we haven't got a lot of time. So putting myself back into an amazing environment with conservation practitioners and scientists, and thinking through, well, how are they doing things differently, and what can I learn from that, and then take it back with our approaches at Kering.
So Joel has referenced at least once on stage the urgent need for biodiversity, attention to biodiversity, and we've described this year as a tipping point. There's the COP gathering later this year in China. It was a topic at the World Economic Forum. Last fall, One Planet, what was it, One Business for Planet Biodiversity. I'm probably butchering the name, sorry, but it's a group of 19 companies that have pledged to put attention into this and build it into their business plans and so forth. I guess my question is, what does that mean? So biodiversity, we talk about this concept, and there's all sorts of sobering numbers. If we don't protect the current ecosystems, we're going to lose all sorts of species and mass extinction and so forth. But what are we really talking about here?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, earlier, Doug from Ecolab was talking about if climate change is the shark and the teeth is water scarcity, then I would say the ocean the sharks we're swimming in is biodiversity. Part of the challenge is it's everything living around us. It's the living skin on the earth. You know, without biodiversity, soil is just dirt. Without biodiversity, a beautiful mountain is a pile of rocks. It can still be beautiful, but it has nothing living on it. So in a way, it's so ever omnipresent that you almost sort of take it for granted. But we can't anymore because we've lost so many species and we've lost so many, so many of the ecosystems have been degraded or lost. And it's that fabric, that interweaving of different species and different habitats and how that relates to sort of the abiotic or the non-living environment that gives us our fresh air, our fresh water, our soil, our fertile soils. So it's so there that we have to now take notice of the fact that it's not as there as it should be, and we've lost a lot. So, but it is hard because it's a question of relevance. So, because we all love nature, and I mean, a lot of us have gone hiking, or I'm going to go hiking this afternoon, and we all want to get out there, and we all love animals. But how is it relevant to our business? So this is what we've got to try and get at now, because we know we're losing biodiversity. So what do I need to do in my company, in my place in my company, that can help help sort of restore and protect and manage biodiversity, and how is that relevant to my business? So those are the questions that are coming up now.
So
and
what,
right
this nature action agenda, what does that mean? I mean, what is the action?
Right, so there's a few things going on. Excuse me, I'm really dehydrated here, but there's a few different things going on with the nature. So WEF, the World Economic Forum, has created a nature action agenda, which is fantastic. They're really putting a focus on convening, and that's what they do super well, convening around global issues. And as it was mentioned, nature, environment, nature loss, biodiversity loss are the top of some of the global risks that we're facing. So, and there's a new report that came out from WEF just before Davos called Nature Risk Rising, which highlights even in more stark clarity the risks to business and the economy of our loss of nature and why we need to focus. So to sort of give a foundation of, okay, that's why we need to focus.
What are those risks?
So there's risks, well, okay, let's talk about Kering as a supply chain company, as a fashion company. Think, okay, we're inspired by nature. We use nature. Some of the species, we use alligators and crocodiles. We use nature and species, so we sort of link to nature in that way. But more importantly, we're an agricultural-based company, and one of the drivers of biodiversity loss is agriculture, one of the main drivers. So when we start actually digging into our supply chains and understanding, well, what we depend on as a company and also what we impact as a company, you start looking and go, wow, we really need to look at where we're getting things from our forests, from our agriculture, from mining, the gold that we source, this cashmere that we source, the wool we source. Wow, it's all dependent on a functioning nature. It really is. We've got to have the right soils, we've got to have the right water. So then you say, okay, we've got to really do something about this, because in fact, when we map our footprint across our entire business, which we did through the Environment Profit and Loss Account, which is a corporate natural capital accounting methodology, and we've been reporting on that for 8 years, so you can look that up. But it shows that 70% of our footprint is in our raw materials. So it's not necessarily about what we do in our shops, or even to a certain extent, not that much in our manufacturing. It is about how we grow our agricultural products, how we extract that, and how we extract our mining materials and so on. So that's why we really focus there.
So that's a focus.
Right.
What does the solution look like? So we say businesses should do this. What is it that they should do? I mean, and just obviously every business is going to have a different focus, but give us an example of a solution.
Okay, so it comes down to, before you can ask sort of what you can do for biodiversity or nature, and I use those terms, but what I mean is, when I say biodiversity, is living nature. What you can do, you've got to sort of think about first, well, what's biodiversity doing for me? I mean, what am I dependent on? And then you start looking, okay, so where am I having impacts? So to do that, it's about understanding supply chains. It's about mapping. It's about geography. It's about location, because biodiversity is very specific in different parts of the world. So you really have to understand where you're getting the stuff from and what sort of production systems that's coming from. Then what you do about it is what a lot of the discussions have been around here during the week, but also at Davos. There was an amazing amount of discussion around regenerative agriculture, restoring soils, protecting riverine habitats and agricultural landscapes, protecting 30% of the land and oceans, putting it in a well-managed system so nature can thrive. But then the 70% that was not protected, working there to restore nature, whether it's in a city or whether it's in an agricultural landscape, we've got to start bringing that back, whether it's about pollinators, or it's about fresh water, or it's about soil, or it's about species, pumas, or jaguars, or guanacos in Patagonia. How do we cohabit with those species, and how do we bring back a sort of more living system around us?
How is the crisis in Australia changing the diet? I'm so sorry, sad. I know this is your country.
It's my country, it's so sad. Well, it's really bad. I mean, we all know how bad it is, and it is an example of a 1-degree world, basically. I mean, they had to change the colours on the weather charts because there are so many days above 40 degrees Celsius now in Australia. They had to add an extra colour. It's tragic. It is, and climate change, it's because of climate change, but it's because of land use practices, it's a whole combination. So now what we've got to do is say, how do we build resilience back into this? Now the real challenge is, how do we help farmers build resilient systems? How do we restore forests? How do we protect what we have so that there's a stock in the future in the face of these crises? There's a lot of work ahead, but it's pretty. It has created. I mean, there's no real good side to it, but obviously it's created a focus and an awareness and an understanding that all the stuff we do, we think we're so clever as humans and we can do so much, but in the face of these climatic issues, it's really tough.
The fashion industry seems like, obviously the food, you brought up agriculture a number of times. The fashion industry is very leaning into this quite a bit. Why is that?
Yeah, it's really, last year was an amazing year for commitment and for the really beginning of an incredible action agenda. And it came about, well, it comes about leadership, and in this case it was really sort of political leadership through President Macron, who hosted the G7 and sort of put a challenge out to French corporate leaders. I'm hosting this, what are we going to do about climate, biodiversity and oceans? And in response to that, the chairman and CEO of Kering, François-Henri Pinault, gathered together, created an initiative called the Fashion Pact, which is now, I think, about 62 companies, CEOs have signed off on an agenda around oceans, climate and biodiversity. And so it was like a rallying of the fashion sector, everything from luxury to fast fashion to everything in between. And smaller companies, large companies have sort of said, okay, we're going to collectively work together, individually do things, but also collectively, and biodiversity is a big part of that. So it's new. We're a bit late to the party, but we love a party, fashion, so like we're it, you know. And so now we've got to chart our way forward on what do we actually do now we've made those commitments.
Now, when you're not on sabbatical, you have the word sustainable in your title, but you're not really part of the sustainability team. You're part of the supply chain. You're part of a broader network of operations within your company. I think a lot of people, you say the word biodiversity again, conservation to an executive, they're going to think philanthropy automatically, right? How do you talk to the C-suite and get them to not just think of it as we need to fund this thing here, and think a little bit more differently. Well, is it the risk, or is there opportunity?
Well, it depends on, it really doesn't, I mean, I'm lucky because the CEO of Kering sort of bought into it, but although the question is now, well, what are we going to do about it? Now I get that it's an issue, so we'll get to that in a minute. I mean, it really depends on where you are, because do you go in with the risk lens? If you go in with the risk lens and say, you know, this is a real problem, the fact that we're losing functionality that we depend on for our supply chains, or is it the risk reputational? Our stakeholders, our shareholders, our customers are saying, what are you doing about the nature crisis? Or is it the investors are saying, hey, we're going to do a nature-related risk analysis on you? So it depends where you are in that discussion, I guess, because there's plenty of ways you can go in. The interesting thing about the solutions is that we've got climate out there. I mean, people sort of get climate. Nature is at least 30% of the solution to climate. You know, nature-based solutions are there. Nature is also a big part of your water solutions. So in fact, you can also flip it and say, if we work on nature-based solutions, we can actually tackle these other things. There's a real efficiency there as well. But the key is understanding which bits of nature you are going to have to look at. And to get to that, I have another comment on that, but maybe you want to ask me something else.
No, go for it.
So one of the things that was really exciting in the last couple of weeks, just before I went to Davos, was a meeting of the Global Commons Alliance, which is a group of 20 entities, NGOs, scientific organizations, to create the plan for the planet, basically. We're moving beyond our safe operating space for humanity. And Johan Rockström, who is the chief scientist at Conservation International and got many titles, was at the Stockholm Resilience Centre, who sort of formulated the planetary boundary concept. He's part of this Global Commons Alliance. There's an Earth Commission with all these brilliant people. There's and then there's a Science-Based Target Network full of other brilliant people and practitioners. And then there's a couple of other entities that are around communication and so on. This group is trying to figure out what exactly is it that we need to do for company, what do companies and cities actually need to do? How do you allocate your responsibility and accountability as you move forward for nature? How do you account and measure your reducing your impact? But then how do you also articulate and show your contribution back? Because we've got to go beyond, obviously we have to go beyond less bad to doing more good. And we can't just all do, if we just all did sort of good things in our own company, it still wouldn't add up to what was needed globally. So there's got to be a bit about how do we do more. So we've started this science-based target for nature framework that has got a lot of work. The devil's in the details, we all get that, but we're moving forward really fast on that. And I hope that that will really create a nice coherence for companies to help them think through how do I set science-based targets.
Right. So the folks in this room have a lot of responsibilities and priorities. So what are the next tangible steps that they can take to really understand where they should go with biodiversity? Some advice.
Okay, so like it's really easy to get really down about the crisis of biodiversity, it really is. But I'm a dogged optimist. And I think, just being here gives me optimism. So I think, but the other side of, the thing about biodiversity is it's so beautiful, and the narrative that you can create when you start turning things into a positive story, and the feelings you can feel are really, really important to not forget that. I mean, a ton of CO2 is not really as compelling as saving species and protecting habitat and creating a flourishing nature around us. So I think there's some really exciting, so don't forget that. Don't forget the narrative. The science is one thing, and we all know we've got the metrics and we have to measure that and so on. But there's a narrative there that's really powerful and important. I think looking at the WEF papers, the Nature Risk Rising, there's a new paper that's going to come out in the middle of the year that's on opportunities and the transition, and that will highlight, well, what are the transitions we actually need to do to get from this situation to a more biodiversity-friendly economy, business practice, and what do you need to do? And that will be really helpful. And then I think it's this idea of just sort of understanding where does nature relevant in your business, and really digging into that, and then figuring out there's some really great coalitions. Also, you mentioned one, the One Planet Business.
I butchered the name. One Planet
There's
Business for Biodiversity,
which is about regenerative agriculture, a fantastic initiative. There's the Business for Nature Coalition, which is about recommending policies. There is the Fashion Pact, if you're a fashion company and you haven't joined that one. So those coalitions, those sort of pre-competitive discussions and coalitions that are happening around solutions are really powerful too, and you can learn a lot from those. So I think there's some really exciting steps. So keep your eyes out and your ears open for the Science-Based Target for Nature framework. So there'll be a lot of tools.
Look for the tools. Sadly, we're out of time. Please
wow, that went fast.
Join me in thanking, I know, very
Thank
fast.
you.
Helen Crowley.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.